There you
There
are.
we go. Okay. Yeah, and
Well, this is a really dense book, man. I mean, I can believe that you
it looks
spent,
like this one, right?
yeah, yeah, this one.
Okay.
I can believe you spent years working on it because it's a lot of work, a lot of artwork, and the writing and stuff. So I believe it would take a long time to do that.
This one, I knew a lot of stuff already. Like, I practically wrote the Robert Crumb biography without any reference, because I
Yeah,
just know it. And a few other people too. But, I needed a lot. I needed some, I mean, I relied on the web, and I have a lot of books. I have all those books, the, History of Underground Comics and Dennis Kitchen's books. And so, I poked around, and, I kept these biographies short because it's more about the artwork, the book.
hmm,
And, there's been some great histories of underground comics, as you know, from Patrick Rosencrantz and a few other people. So I didn't need to, like, really do like thorough long biographies. I didn't think.
hmm.
Aside from Crumb and Spiegelman, a couple of them that you just had to go there and just include everything. But no, I didn't have any help aside from just Eric Reynolds going over everything. We went over everything for like a month, fine tuning it and just getting rid of. And we ran stuff by Patrick Rosencrantz as well.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and sure enough, there's a couple of mistakes in there, and I'm fessing up right now because I know I'll be called out for it by somebody. There's a couple of minor mistakes in the book, which will be corrected. Assuming the book goes into a second printing or a paperback.
What are the mistakes?
Well, the most glaring one is Trina Robbins. We have her birth date. For some reason I read it somewhere that she was born in 1943.
Mhm.
She was actually born in 1938. So I shaved 5 years off her age. And somehow I think Trina will be happy about that.
Yeah, she'll appreciate
So,
it.
but that's glaring because it's like right in the main, aside to the left of her illustration, her birth date is right there, 1943. So that's incorrect. Somehow that slipped in there. Two other minor ones. We mentioned that S. Clay Wilson was a medic in the army, and he wasn't.
Hmm.
Patrick pointed that out. The other one is that Trina did a parody of Trash Man in Bijou Comics #8, Spain's Trash Man. It was actually Jay Kinney.
And how do you work on? Because what you do is you do the portrait, but then you have the stuff in the background that really gives you more detail about the personality of the artist. Bill Griffith, you'll have like all his junk in the back on his shelves and stuff like that. That gives you like a taste of who the person is. Or is that only for the artist that you know?
No, not necessarily. It's like I don't really plan it ahead. They seem, I think they had each one happened organically. With the Griffith, like I love. You said junk. I love drawing junk. I love drawing stuff. It's almost as interesting and enjoyable for me as drawing, the face or the body. Sometimes more interesting. So Bill Griffith has this amazing collection of stuff. Aside from his books, I love drawing books too, spines of books.
Oh well,
Um,
I hate
so,
doing
but Bill has all these old toys, and then he has these bottles, which I think people have sent him over the years, with Zippy, like products called Zippy. And there's for some reason Zippy was a popular soda brand, but there were like 4 or 5 different companies that called their soda Zip or Zippy. So his fans would send him these over there. So he saved them. They're on his shelf. So I found some photos of that stuff. I said I got to incorporate that into this drawing, just to make it more amusing for me.
it. Yeah.
So that's how that one came together. And the same with some of the other ones. Like I love drawing stuff, people's studios. I'm fascinated by especially cartoonist studios, like the environment. You can see mine behind me, but it's just a portion. But
Right.
yeah, but that to me that's more interesting in a lot of cases than just drawing a portrait, a straight on portrait.
But is this style of working with I guess it's ink wash or something or watercolor or
Well, I'll show you. This is this is basically the black ink I use. This is Luminex. It's I just love it. It's just like I'm not really that particular about what brushes I use or what ink, but I stumble across something. I said, yeah, this works the best, and I'll just continue using this. Like paper wise, you know, Strathmore Bristol 500 series.
oh yeah,
Like I'm addicted to it.
yeah.
That's all I use now.
And
I only discovered that a couple of years ago.
is this style more labor intensive than the old pointillism style?
No, it's less. But if you've probably noticed, I use the brush now to like get that
Yeah.
stipple effect, or at least the dots, or just to enhance the, I'm more into, it's kind of like reverting back to that, but I would never sit there with the crow quill pen and do those dots again,
Yeah.
It affected my eyesight a bit. I work with glasses now when I work, but it's just more comfortable to, I work with the brush. Everything is the brush. I mean, after the penciling, and I just like the effect I'm getting with the brush. The lighter kind of stippling, enhancing, shading, like that.
Yeah, I've never seen anybody work like that, do that. But like the pointillism thing, I feel like you had a lot of rip-offs though, like in the maybe 80s or 90s or something. Like I'll come across something and I think, is this Drew? And then it's not you.
Okay, imitations is in sincerest form of flattery. Um, I didn't really pay attention. I know some people were doing it, but it really was labor intensive, and I don't think a lot of people had the patience that I had, at least to do it for 10 years, until I got bored with it. And also, trying to keep up with assignments, it was slowing me down. So I phased it out,
Yeah.
and hopefully to the point I was like so slow in phasing it that people didn't even notice when I stopped doing it. And I
Yeah.
remember the last dot I did was for just a stupid assignment for Premiere magazine, which doesn't even exist anymore. It was a drawing of Antonio Banderas. That was the last dot I applied to an illustration around 1994.
Is that reprinted in the Fun Never Stops?
I don't even think that was reprinted because it wasn't very good.
Oh, okay.
I'm really hard on myself. I look at like a lot of my old stuff and I say, "Oh my God, that sucks." I was like,
Well,
I put it away in the closet, and hopefully, nobody will see it again.
do you have like a closet full of your originals?
Yeah, yeah, I keep them like in these boxes, like airtight boxes and stuff, aside from the stuff I've sold,
Hmm.
or yeah, over the years.
And you mostly will sell the portraits to the people who the
I
portraits.
have a couple of buyers, a couple of people, collectors who've built up a collection of my stuff
Hmm.
over the years. So, a lot of the recent stuff is gone, has been sold.
It takes me just to do like the colors on a page. It takes me 4 to 5 hours, like
Yeah.
per page, and that's computer coloring and doing
Hmm.
like an ink wash layer as well and stuff.
Yep.
How long?
I don't do anything. I don't do anything on the computer.
Oh, really?
Some people are like, surprised about like a few people have written me recently. It's like, what program do you use? And I don't even know what they're talking about. I said, I use my hand. This is the program.
Yeah.
I use my hand and a brush and ink, and paper. That's the program I'm using. But a couple of people have said, like, have asked about that recently. I'm so kind of surprised. People you'd think would know better, you
Hmm.
know. But I guess that's kind of a compliment because you can accomplish anything on the computer now. And I said, no, I'm just doing it the old fashioned way. And that's how I'll die out.
Well, how do you put your books together though? Do you scan them in yourself or do you send them
Yeah,
to?
yeah. My wife, Kathy, scans. She does all the scanning. And then we clean things up a little bit if it's needed, like that. Take out like smears and things like that. But that's it.
And then for a book like this, you would send like a file with all the biographies written down
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Yeah.
kind
With
of
the
have
last few books I've done, that's what we do. Just send a file. Yeah. Don't the original art never leaves the house anymore, aside from when people buy it.
and then did you put together the border on the cover and the of the
Yeah, first I drew it and I was not happy with it. I actually sat there and drew the effing thing. And I wasn't happy. Some of the what I drew exists there, but then I would like I scanned some of the original art from that I was using and worked into it. Like that. It was a process. In fact, I think that took longer than actually painting Robert Crumb on the cover.
what was the first, because I want to go back and talk about Fantagraphics. Like, what was the first book that you had done with Fantagraphics? Is the one with your brother?
Yeah, Persons Living or Dead, that large size book with Shemp Howard on the cover. That came out in 1985, I think. And Gary Groth called me out of the blue.
Hmm.
Like a lot of people like have these stories. I just watched the Hernandez brothers
Oh yeah, I gotta watch that.
last night, which is great. A little academic, but really good. They
Hmm.
could have used a few more cartoonists like you,
Oh.
Peter Bagg, Dan Close, but I got no complaints. It was a great doc.
Hmm.
But it's like the Hernandez brothers heard from Gary Groth like after a month after they sent in their work, and surprised to hear. Sort of the same thing with me. Gary had like kind of been snotty about my work in some of the reviews of Raw in
Hmm.
the early 80s in Comics Journal. It's like, okay, well, it's not for him. And all of a sudden he calls me, said, "Hey, we want to do an anthology of your work." And I'm thinking, I didn't call him on it. I didn't say, but you said you weren't crazy about that Andy Griffith. But that was it. I said, okay, sure, that's great. He said, I think a lot of people seem to like your work. You have a lot of stuff that's been out there in heavy metal and National Lampoon now and Raw and Weirdo, and it's time. So that was the first book from '85, and then I just stayed. We just stayed. Aside from branching out to Penguin for Warts and all, a
Yeah.
couple other publishers. They've been. I'm just happiest working with them, even though you don't make a lot of money, but you get the book you want.
And was there like an editor at Penguin? Because it was like around that time, Penguin did a lot of. I think they did like a Michael Dugan collection.
They did a few. They did Ben Catcher collection.
Yeah,
They might have done a Charles Burns. This is around 1990.
that's right. There must have been an editor there who
The
was.
thing is, Art Spiegelman had a deal with them.
Okay.
They were doing Raw as the paperback version. Then they did 3. So Art had a deal with them to bring in cartoonists, and so he brought my brother and I in to do Warts and all. It wasn't called Warts and all that. The book was actually supposed to be published by Doubleday at first, because Doubleday was also doing these comics anthologies, like the Harvey Pekar books
Yeah.
and Mad Peck. They did a Mad Peck book and a Kyle Baker book, but some of them didn't sell very well. So Doubleday canceled it. I think the Pekar books did well for them.
Mhm.
So they canceled those. They canceled that series, and they canceled our book. So the day they canceled it, Art Spiegelman called and said, "Hey, I just heard your book got canceled. Can I bring it to Penguin?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, that'd be great." So he became the editor. It was his idea to like do the square version, which means the comics had to be cut up a bit, which at first I was put off by, but I'm happy with the result finally.
Yeah, well, wouldn't you want? Because that book is sort of timeless, and it's a perfect companion to your first book. Wouldn't you want to bring that back into print? Isn't
Oh
the
well,
time?
Fantagraphics reprinted that a
They
couple of
did?
years later without the
Oh,
without the embossed warts.
oh, I
Um,
didn't know that. I've only seen the
yeah,
Penguin.
it came out. Fantagraphics they put it out again. Basically the exact same book, but no embossed warts and a shinier cover. So
Okay.
it did come out. Yeah.
And is it well hardcover or was it?
No, basically the exact same book.
Oh, okay.
They Spiegelman and Robert Zakoriak just sent them the files, and they put it out without embossing the awards. So
Okay.
so if you have the Warty copy,
I do. Yeah.
that's the one
That's the one to have.
that's the one you want. Yeah.
And then I have like a collection of your spy strips.
Yeah, that book I hate. It did not come out the way I wanted it at all. They reduced the artwork, the cover. I hate the cover. I'm very hard. Like I said, I'm hard on myself, but I hate the cover. It's Madonna. It's just a stupid concept. I hate that book. I thought about actually talked to Kim Thompson about this before he died. Like, could we reprint that book? Blow the artwork up like the way I wanted it. But then I started looking through it. It's just so dated.
It is. Yeah.
So much of it is dated.
Yeah.
Couple things still work, but so much, it's like nobody's going to know who Mike Milken is anymore, or this one or that one. It's just like filled with and I hate doing topical material. That's one of the reasons. It's just stuff it can become dated the next day almost. And
Yeah.
I used to do a lot of that topical stuff back in the 90s and for magazines. And it's just like, what happens to it? It's like nobody's going to care about, illustrations of even Bill Clinton and stuff. It's like it's just such old news.
Yeah. But you never, besides that kind of stuff, you never consider like an audience for your work at all, right? Like you're basically just doing the stuff that interests you.
I still think like I did originally. Like I'm doing stuff to amuse my brother. I'm doing stuff to amuse myself and some of our friends, and that was basically it. And I
Yeah.
still think that way. Like, I don't even think about an audience. I don't think what people will like. It's just if I have a whim or a thought of like the Underground Comics anthology was something that I had been thinking about for a couple of years
Mhm.
after I did those books of heroes of the comics from the mainstream comics.
Yeah.
You know, creators like Jack Kirby and all the EC guys. So I thought a good follow up would be, the Undergrounds, jump a decade, to when comics got interesting again, 1967 with the first Zap. But I wasn't committed to it. And my problem was that I wasn't a big fan of all the artists. There were some artists, and I'm not going to mention any names, some artists I just was not that thrilled with. I mean, their work, even when I was a kid, it's like, well, it doesn't appeal to me. So that was my big hesitation with doing it finally. But I had lunch with Robert Crumb in early 2019,
Mhm.
and I mentioned that to him. I said, that's my hesitation. Otherwise, he said, look, you don't have to like everybody you draw. And that just made perfect sense to me. He said, yeah, of course. I've drawn Donald Trump numerous times. Doesn't mean I have to like, you know. So
Yeah.
that's when I committed to do that book.
So this is sort of the volume three of the Heroes of the
You
Comics.
could look at it that way, yeah. Although, you know, there's nothing to do with superheroes in this one, you know. A
Yeah.
couple of like superhero parodies, I guess. Trashman maybe is the closest thing you can get to a superhero.
Yeah. But think about, I always think about like how, what an amazing time period this was. Like when Robert Crumb and like the underground cartoonists were going and they were just doing their own work. At that same time in the mainstream, that's when all the stuff that is now being turned into movies was being created as well, you know? Like
Sure.
Spider-Man and the Marvel stuff was really kicking off.
Yeah.
It was an incredibly fertile time. And it's just, I wish I could go back there and just like walk around in that scene, you
I
know?
think, you know, it's funny because I agree it was, but you know, if you go back that, but I've talked about this before. My father worked up at Magazine Management, the company called Magazine Management, which is where Marvel Comics came from. You
Hmm.
know, so Stan Lee was in the next office for my dad for 12 years. So I grew up knowing Stan when I'd go visit my dad. And I'd walk around in those offices, you know, where these guys were like Jack Kirby was sitting or Steve Ditko or whoever, you know, they were just sitting, just anonymous guys, you know, not flashy at all, at little like wooden desks doing their work. It was not an exciting thing that was going on. Like if you know, Stan Lee made it, I guess, kind of exciting, that world, you know, becoming a celebrity, putting a wig on his head, you know, like reinventing himself as this character, Stan Lee, you
Hmm.
know. But it was just not a very exciting, you know, era as far as aside from the work.
Hmm.
And I've observed that. It's like in my books of heroes of the comics, most of them are just sitting at their desks. They're just like, okay, they're not plumbers or they're not lawyers. They do they do comics work, you know, anonymously. And a lot of them were embarrassed by it. They wouldn't go to cocktail parties. They would never say, "Oh, I work for comic books. I do artwork for comic
Well,
books." So,
underground, the underground scene, they were having so much fun, and I think somebody told me what I think Dennis Kitchen told me what the page rate was, and it was like probably 25 to $50 a page or something for an underground comic, and you add that up, and then you like consider like what rent was at that time period, like what the cost of living was, and I'm like, I would just be cranking out comics and just having such a great time. You
yeah, I agree. It's like I love thinking about that era. I don't think hardly any of them were in it for the money. You know, it was just like you know, it was a new you know, it was just brand new to be part of that world. It was you know, it was the media picked up on it at least in the late 60s, especially Robert Crumb, but
Mhm.
the whole thing, you know. So it was an exciting time, but I don't think anybody, you know, nobody was expecting to get rich
Mm.
or to make a lot of money from it. Although some people did over the years, or at least later. You know, I mean, Gilbert Shelton has done very well. The guys who are, you know, smart enough or canny enough to publish their own work, things like that. You know,
Yeah,
Crumb wasn't doing well financially, and he was really struggling in the late 70s. He owed back taxes to the IRS. People were loaning him money, so you know, it was certainly not a you know, something to get into to make money at the time. But people weren't thinking along those lines.
do you think that they were trying to make an example of Crumb with the back taxes thing, like how hard they made it for him?
It's quite possible. I don't know. I haven't really analyzed that, but I know he was going through some tough times there, and
Mhm.
people like Jules Pfeiffer and you know this one and that were loaning him money or giving him money.
Yeah.
Kurt Vonnegut, I think, gave him money. So I don't know if they made him an example. It's quite possible. You know, I would have. You know, it's quite possible. Yeah,
Have you ever? My mother used to live like a couple blocks away from the Haight Ashbury.
yeah,
I used to go and visit her in San Francisco, and then just go and walk up and down that road. Uh, and I got my photo like at the corner where
yeah,
supposedly Crumb was selling Zap from a
yeah,
baby
yeah.
carriage, which I don't know.
With his pregnant wife.
Yeah, I don't know if that's actually. I think that's just a legend. I don't know if he actually did that
I think
stuff.
yeah, I think because he drew it, so that made me think it really happened. He drew it
Yeah,
specifically with with his wife Dana pregnant, and the baby carriage filled with the zaps and the hate behind him. It's possibly enhanced it because he has hippies all around him and stuff. That's a great drawing, but
have you ever done
you can
that? You're
actually
just
see
like
you can
walking around
actually
the house.
if you see watch the film The Graduate, you can see like a glimpse of the hate in there, and including the print mint store
Oh, really?
in the background when
Oh, okay.
Dustin Hoffman and Captain Ross are having lunch in a cafe right across the street. You can see the print mint,
Hmm.
which
Yeah,
is fun, of course.
that stuff was like it's my entryway into alternative comics because I didn't know about Fantagraphics until I saw the documentary Crumb, and then I started getting Crumb, like the complete Crumb series, and I
Mm.
looked at the publisher, and it was Fantagraphics Books. And I wasn't really, I didn't know anything about that stuff. I just like, I knew about superhero comics, and that was it. And so I got like a Fantagraphics catalog, and that was like my entryway into comics was through
Uh-huh.
Crumb and through the underground artists because I did like a show, and this guy gave me a copy of Rebel Visions, and so I read that book, and I felt like that was the same scene that was happening in comics at that day, and that was like 2005, 2000, yeah,
Yeah,
2005.
around that. Yeah,
So
yeah. That's a great entry into that world. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Covering it that way. I was aware of Robert Crumb when I was 9 years old, and I was way too old to be aware. I mean, to be looking at that stuff. And I talk about that in the book a little in my little introduction. It's like I just discovered that when I was 9, like early, some of those early undergrounds in the back of a bookstore in Manhattan. And I couldn't believe what I was looking at. And I was just like, I felt nervous, but I couldn't look away. So I was just thinking, how do I buy these? My dad was like buying a bunch of books up front. So I just slipped them into his pile of books, thinking he would just think they were comic books, which he did. And that started my obsession with underground comics.
And do you still have all those comics that you bought?
Yeah, I still have them. In fact, when I was working on this book, I would just every day, like, just sift through them, reread all those stories. I hadn't read Binky Brown for, 40 years, but, I just reread everything I have. I'm not a completist. I don't have everything, but I have a lot, and you can see things online now. But yeah, I just like was refreshing myself every day, like
Mm.
just getting into the world, you know, trying to be as obsessed with it as I could instead of thinking about COVID. I mentioned before that my hesitation about doing this book was because I didn't like a lot of the artists, but then like re going through everything again, it's like I decided, not in every case, but a lot of them, like I wound up liking. I mean, I would see different things than I saw when I was a kid, like like their technique, especially. I'm not going to mention names, but there were certain artists who like I always was dismissive of,
Mhm.
and now it's like, whoa, this guy or this woman was really good. I mean, look what's going on in this panel, and look at that, the drawing, and yeah, it's like, so that was surprising, and it made me feel like I was wrong about in a lot of cases anyway.
Have you been getting any feedback at all from
Well,
cartoons?
the book is, like I said, is not out yet. It comes out in about a week and a half.
Mm.
But it's been sent out to a few people. I've heard from, well, aside from you and Glenn Head and Art Spiegelman, who blurbed it. I haven't heard from Robert Crumb yet. Um, but I've heard from Dennis Kitchen. He wrote me a really lovely letter about it. Robert Armstrong, a few other. Oh, I heard from, there's a guy in the book named Andy Martin. Had you ever heard of him?
Never, no.
Okay. More and more people are saying, like, I never heard of maybe half of the people in this book.
Yeah.
And I admit myself, I went into this not knowing about maybe a dozen people, not knowing their work, but like discovering it. And I had a rule, like I wasn't going to I wasn't going to draw anybody that hadn't at least been in about 10 issues of underground comics,
Yeah.
because a lot of people did one piece and that was it. So Andy Martin was one guy. I knew his work. He was in Yellow Dog comics and the tabloid. And his work was really interesting, but he stopped doing comics when he was like 20. So somehow I was able to get in touch with his daughter. Um, and she sent me some photos of him. I didn't even know what he looked like. She sent me some photos of him when he was young. So that was my reference point. But that was like, and it was the same with a few people, like that I maybe knew the work, like Dave Herring was in
Mhm.
Bijou Comics #1. He did a few things. He had an interesting style. He was a humorous guy. And then he went into the Vietnam War for 2 years, like right when he was started to build up his underground career. And then he came back and did a little more, but so I wanted to pay. It was like, for me, it was more interesting, or as interesting, to like dig up these like obscure people and add them to the mix. So
Yeah, like Michael McMillan, who does not get the respect.
no, not at all, and he's great.
He's one of the
Um,
best. So
Dan
good.
Nadell is like a big proponent of Michael McMillan.
Yeah.
He's in his 80s now. He was like one of the older guys. He's pushing 90. I think he's about to turn 90. But I got in touch with him too because I didn't even know what he looked like. It was a little drawing of him that a self-portrait in Arcade magazine, a couple issues. That's all I had to go on, and I wasn't going to use that as reference because, like, it was more of a caricature. So I contacted him, and he wrote me back a lovely letter and physically sent me a photograph. He doesn't work on the computer. And I used that and enhanced it a bit, the background and whatnot. And I sent him back the photograph. I said, Michael, I'm going to send you back the photograph. No worries. I made a copy of it, sent it right back to him. But I was thrilled to include him in the book because, he's one of the greats, but not really known as much as he should be. In fact, I was just talking to somebody, my friend John Wendler, that there should be a book of some of the lesser known underground cartoonists, a collection celebrating some of the lesser known people, McMillan certainly, and a few others like and Andy Martin, and there's a few others that I think should. I don't know who would do that book. I guess Patrick Rosencrantz.
Yeah, he's the only guy.
Yeah, I guess so. But he's got, I think, volume 3 of the Spain anthology coming out. I don't know how he does it.
I don't know either. And he keeps saying he's not going to do it anymore. It's like,
yeah, well, he's getting up there too, but he wrote a lovely afterword for my book, which I was really about. And then I ran everything by him, because he's the expert on that subject.
Yeah.
Ran all the bios by him, and he missed a couple of minor things too. We all missed it, like the S. Clay Wilson thing and the Trina stuff, but it happens.
Yeah, I tried to do a Michael McMillan book with Fantagraphics. I have like a file full of his stuff, everything I could find of his in comics. I scanned it all in.
Were you in touch with him?
Yeah, I was not in touch with him, but I think his wife or somebody. This was about 2015. And then I just got too busy, and then
yeah, I think Dan Nadell includes him in the Art Out of Time book. One of them.
Yeah,
his stuff is great. He was ahead of his time. I always wondered why he didn't wind up in Raw, right? Because he was in Arcade, Michael McMillan, in the late 70s. And then Raw happened like in 1980, 81. And he wasn't there. And I wondered, and I asked Mark Newgard, I said, what do you think? He said, his work was too hippie-ish. So all right, maybe so.
Yeah.
The other guy I loved learning about and finding out what he looked like was this guy, Buckwheat Florida Jr., who, again, most people don't know, but what a name. His real name was Blakely Bell, I think. He's still alive. He's in Thailand. But he went by that moniker of Buckwheat Florida Jr. And his work was really cool, trippy work. Buckwheat is in the book. And, my friend John Wendler, tracked down some photographs of the guy. Not great photos. So, but he's in there. And I'm happy about that, too, because I was always curious about him,
Yeah.
So he is.
You'll probably be getting a lot of
even Patrick Rosencrantz didn't know who Buckwheat. He didn't know what he looked like.
Oh wow! And so Patrick was just around that scene. He was around all those people and stuff at the time, right?
He was one of he was around. He was writing about it, but he was also photographing all those people. Him and the one other guy. Hold on a second. Yeah, the guy who did this book, the photographer.
Oh.
Do you have this book?
No, I've never seen that.
Okay. Hold on a second. Photos by Glay Geerdes is his name. He's deceased. This book is called The Underground Comics Family Album, and it's photographs. What he did was, photographs and biography, similar to my book, but his own photographs he took of these people, mostly at comic book shows, and he has mini biographies as well. The mini biographies are filled with misinformation, but his heart was in the right place. It's you can find it online. It's called The Underground Comics Family. It's on. You can pick it up on eBay, I believe. For some reason, he got Will Eisner to write the introduction. I don't know what Will Eisner had to do with underground comics. He's condescending in his appreciation of the underground comics, like when he would call Robert Crumb Bob Crumb, the same kind of condescension. But still, there it is.
You guys do not like Eisner. You and like Newgarden.
The thing is, when I had him as a teacher, I liked him a lot. We got along great.
Oh.
You know, he was kind of pompous. He was like, you know, in Will Eisner's world, you know, all that existed was Will Eisner. So when Will Eisner taught comics, he taught Will Eisner's comics. So he wanted his students to draw like him. To like, you know, he had special rules like always draw your balloons first before you draw a panel, before you draw the art, which never made sense to me. I really liked him. He was a raconteur, old-fashioned kind of character, even though when I had him as a teacher, I think he was my age, the same age I am now.
Yeah.
I liked him as much as I like Harvey Kurtzman in a different way, but Harvey Kurtzman seemed, this is like the late 70s, early 80s. Harvey seemed to be of his era, of like, I mean, of the time, 1980. Will Eisner seemed to be back in 1940.
Yeah.
He wore a three-piece suit. He just looked like an old-fashioned gentleman. I liked him fine. The problem was after a couple of years, you know, I would keep hearing after I graduated from SVA, you know, I didn't keep in touch with Eisner and I didn't really keep in touch with Kurtzman. I was busy working on my work, trying to like, you know, get established, get my work seen. I wasn't really going back and visiting my teachers. So I didn't really keep in touch with them too much. But Eisner, I think I heard from a few people he resented that because he was becoming aware of my work. He was seeing it in the media and whatnot. So then he was, I heard from a few people again that he was bad mouthing me in a weird way. And so that's what happened, you know, and I was confused by that because I always got along with him. He gave me straight A's when I was a student. He would kind of like take me aside and like snicker about like comics fans, like secret stuff like that, you know,
Yeah.
what he really thought of the nerds and the fanboys and stuff, you know.
So it's not true that you would go into bookstores and tear out pages of his books that were on the shelves?
I don't know. I never even heard that one. No, that's not true. I was never petty like that. I did go into bookstores when I was a kid and tear out pages because I didn't have the money to buy a book. So if I wanted some reference photo or something, I would tear it. I still feel bad about that. I don't recommend anybody do that type of thing. But no, I never heard that, and I never did that.
And then in Ben Schwartz's essay, he said that you one of the things that Will Eisner would always say is, "I was walking past the TV the other night."
Well,
Like,
that's a great story, yeah. Because we, you know, in the class, it was an Eisnerism. We had a bunch of them, and one of them was like, he'd be sitting there. He goes, "Yeah, I was walking past." Yeah, he could never admit he was actually sitting there watching TV. He was always walking past the room, and the TV would be on, and he would stick his head in and sit down and watch the show. He could never admit he was actually sitting there watching TV that night. Classic Eisner.
yeah,
That's one of the things I liked about him. He was endearing.
yeah,
You know, overall, it's like, you know, I guess he was one of the greats in that world. You know, he was
yeah.
up there with, you know, in the early world of comics at least. But he was a character, you know, and I'm hoping someday the real book about him will come out. And Paul Levis did you know, an excellent book about him, like, you know, really rich with graphics and whatnot. And he interviewed me for that one.
Yeah.
You know,
It was good. That was good. I read that book this summer too, and that was great. I mean, I really did like a deep dive. Like I read as much of his stuff as I could. Even the Will Eisner quarterlies that Dennis Kitchen
yeah,
published,
yeah,
some of the Warren Spirit magazines that
yeah.
could get kind of cheaply. And I appreciate like some of them are good. Like I liked the Name of the Game. Like he's really good at writing Jewish, like early American Jewish family like sagas and stuff like that. Like all that's really fascinating to me.
I think one of his Contract with God, the musical. Have you heard about that?
No, I haven't heard about that.
Like, you know, so that's something to look forward to.
Yeah. Hey, was your Crumb and Me the last? Was that the last comic you did?
It might have been, yeah, yeah. But it took me so long to do it that I wasn't excited to like get back into it so fast. Also, the main thing with the comics for me is the venues. They just don't seem to exist anymore. I was just back in the 80s into the 90s, but back in the 80s you had, you know, Weirdo and Raw and Heavy Metal and Bad News, and it just, you know, a bunch of them. And I got, you know, it was like excited. There was like a competitive drive going on with a lot of the guys who were doing stuff. And that's how I felt also doing work for the New York Observer and Spy magazine. You know, you just get into this positive competitive thing where you just want to outdo, or, you know, like, okay, I did this, but next week I'm going to do better because this guy did this. You know, and it's so great. And I want, yeah, it's just that just doesn't seem to exist anymore. Even when I was doing work for Entertainment Weekly, there were so many great illustrators around then, the 90s and the early 2000s, every week. And that just all faded away. It just doesn't exist anymore. So like, I'm just not excited about, but especially with comics, it's just like, you know, like doing work, seeing your work in print with Robert Crumb or with Art Spiegelman or or Kim Deitch or those guys, just so exciting and, you know, inspiring. That just doesn't exist anymore.
You wouldn't do a comic about your meeting Groucho Marx?
Yeah, I've considered it. You know, I have a long list of things that I've thought about, but my brother really did a great article about us going to Groucho's house,
Oh,
New York Magazine. So there's nothing really I could add to it aside from, you know, adding some visuals.
yeah.
He wrote the definitive article about it. I think it's online.
Okay.
It was Our Day with Groucho in 1975 when Groucho was 85. Yeah, he was 85. He died 2 years later.
You get tired of telling that story?
Um, no, I bring, you know, I've told it a bunch of times, especially when I was guesting on Gilbert Gottfried. You know, he always wanted to hear it. And I would try to think of new things to add to it, you know, and I could come up with stuff like there were like a lot of young celebrities showing up at Groucho's house all the time. And I noticed that, like Sally Kellerman walked in, Elliot Gould, Dennis Wilson, and they would all like kind of meander to the back bathroom quickly after they came in. So then I realized I went back to that bathroom and I saw a big bowl filled with cocaine.
Oh,
I said, okay. So, you know, maybe they love Groucho and they love going to Groucho's house, but there was a little bit more, there was a little bit more of an enticement there. I'm
yeah.
just speculating. I'm not saying that's absolutely true, but that was my speculation.
Well, when you worked for Topps, were you working as the cartoon editor at the National Lampoon at the same time?
I only worked at that job at the Lampoon for a year, 1 year, and it was just to bring in. It was just to do revive their comic section. But I didn't enjoy it because I got friction. I got some friction from some of the other editors. They weren't getting it. They weren't getting the work of Chris Ware or Dan Close or Justin Green. They just weren't getting it. It's like, is this funny? I said, look, it doesn't, you know, it's like, it's all subjective whether it's funny or not, but these are really super talented people who are not famous. Maybe they will be someday. You know, it was like that. So it was like a constant fight, an uphill battle. So I only lasted a year there, but Lampoon shut down anyway and moved out of New York. So,
Yeah,
you
it
know.
wasn't the good Lampoon. It was the bad
Yeah,
Lampoon.
it was like Lampoon had been going downhill for about a decade. So this is like 1990,
Uh,
and Lampoon hadn't been really like the Lampoon since the mid 70s. So it
mhm.
was like really like, you know, had been going steadily downhill. So I joined Lampoon when they were like decided, I think they made a decision not to be funny anymore, not to run humor. And that's when they hired me. I never approached Mad about doing work for them, but then the editor all of a sudden like um, called me out of the blue, like the mid 90s, and said, like, we'd like you to do a test page. So I'm thinking, test page? Okay, sure. So I did a test page. I guess I passed because then I started doing work and did work for about 20 years. You know, in a lot of cases, they would send me a script. I wouldn't read the script, you know, and I would just like ask them to just block out what they wanted art wise, but I wouldn't bother reading the script. You know, to this day, I kept all my Mad, you know, the issues and stuff and the pieces I did, and I still haven't read maybe about 75% of the stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I was afraid if I read it, I'm not going to want to draw it. That was the thing. So
Was Mad black and white when you were working for them?
when they started, yeah, when I started working, did the first thing for them in 94. Yeah, they were still black and white. And it was still old school. Mort Drucker was still doing work for them. Jack Davis, Al Jaffe. Um, Most of the old guys, they were still around
Mhm.
doing work. And that was the thrill for me. Like I said, you know, having your work appearing with Robert Crumb and Weirdo, having your work appearing with Mort Drucker and Al Jaffe and Jack Davis and Mad was a real kick. That was fun. That was a
Yeah.
thrill.
You did work for Topps at the same time as Lampoon. Like you had this time period. It seems like of 15 years maybe where you were just working.
Well, with Tops, I maybe more like 5 years. It
Oh,
was,
really?
you know, Art Spiegelman was there in the product development department. Art Spiegelman brought in Mark Newgarden
Mhm.
after we graduated from SVA, School of Visual Arts, in the early 80s. So Mark became like Mark and Art worked on Garbage Pail Kids. So after Garbage Pail Kids became such a huge sensation, they had carte blanche, and so Mark brought me in to like start developing some series, high school series mainly, Toxic High, and some other things as well. So I didn't work there. I go in a lot just because we were hanging out and having fun. But I did all my work from home, and then we'd go out to Brooklyn and bring things in and stuff, and so that was a fun period, but it didn't last.
You
And then
have
when it came out, they cut it. They cut all the violence and all the insanity way back.
yeah,
So truncated version, which was disappointing. But I was already done with Tops.
yeah, because of there was like actual school shootings and stuff like that
Yeah,
happening.
right. That was like, like, yeah, all the Columbine thing and all that stuff was happening
Mhm,
just right before Toxic High was supposed to hit. Toxic High was filled with horrible ultra violence,
mhm,
in a humorous vein,
mhm.
but gun violence, stabbing, bloodletting, decapitations, things like that. Plus also like snot and bodily functions. We went over the line, completely over the line. And they wound up cutting it way back.
Did you keep boxes of those cards? Do you have any of that stuff?
I have the cards and I have all the original art as well. Yeah, I have the cards. I mean, once it came out and they shipped me cards, I started looking through them and I was disappointed that things were just edited. Things were edited out. It didn't come out the way we hoped it would. What
Yeah,
we did, that my thinking with doing this work for Tops is what would I have liked when I was a kid? What kind of stuff? So that's where we went. It was that theory also. The Lampoon High School Yearbook was a big influence.
yeah. And then you did that, and then you did Barfo.
Barfel was like a novelty item. Art Spiegelman did the rough sketches on that. It was like these little. You've seen it, so it's like a little accordion characters with a nuclear family, a mom, dad, daughter, son, and a dog. And you'd squeeze the little accordion, and the candy would vomit out their mouths. So I designed the little the faces for the characters and also the box art, and that was fun. That got some attention. Time Magazine did an article on it.
You were able to make a living from your artwork, like basically right out of school, right?
Um, at first, not really, because I was doing those stipple comics for Weirdo, which Robert paid $50 a page, which actually was twice as much as what Raw was paying.
Mm.
But I was struggling for a couple of years. This stuff took me a long time. And it's like one of the last things I did with my brother Josh was Joey Heatherton comic. And that just wound up taking months and months. And then we got a paycheck, and the paycheck was $600, which we split. So for months and months of work, I got $300. I said, I can't really. And also, I already got together with Kathy at that point. We were planning a future of getting married and getting a house. And so I just knew that I just can't go on like this. Something, I gotta make some changes. I didn't want to give up doing comics altogether. But that's when I started doing work for Tops, and and then the money became regular, and that led to mainstream assignments.
Mm.
And well, actually, Spy Magazine led to the mainstream assignments. People started seeing my work in Spy, and then the New York Times called and things like that. That's what led. One thing leads to another. So
Yeah, like I listen to the Dana Goldauer podcast,
yeah,
and one thing he says on there a lot, which is so true, is that stuff leads to stuff.
yeah.
Like as long as you're always making stuff, like opportunities will arrive.
You said that on the recent show with yes, Frank Santopadre
Yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah. That's what I just listened to. But he
Yeah,
says it. He said that a few times on there, and I always took note of it. Like
it's so true.
it
That could
is.
be title. That could be a title of somebody's book anyway.
Yeah,
Stuff. It's true. That's what it's like. Yeah, I mean, I could track everything, like the work I did, and then what led to something else. Like uh, the editor of Mad, John Ficarra, called me because he saw my work in the New York Times,
mhm.
and he knew it from Spy as well. So like one thing just led to another like that.
What about Screw? The Screw magazine cover you did. Would that lead?
My brother Josh again was like an editor there.
Mhm.
So I didn't want to do any sex comics, or not that I was against it, but it was just too easy, too obvious, too expected. So I didn't want to do it like just naked bodies and whatnot. So I I submitted. I said, look, I just drew Shemp Howard. I got some indication of a nude woman behind him, like in silhouette. is that good enough? And is that enough? It's like, so yeah, sure. So so there was Shemp on the cover of Screw Magazine, 1982, confusing all of Times Square, I'm sure. Well, I used to like imagine these derelicts waking up in the morning and looking up at the newsstand and seeing Shemp looking back at them and what they were thinking. Like, oh my God.
It's the least sexy cover that you could
Hopefully.
possibly have.
I also got Ernest Borgnine on the cover and Tor Johnson. I just pushed it. I was like, okay, well, let me push it. And, and got away with it,
Yeah.
because we're wise guys.
What was your drawing style like before you got into pointillism? Before you started?
Just I think I posted some on Facebook, just like faces, mostly faces, grotesque faces, really inspired by Basil Wolverton and Mort Drucker and Mad Guys, but just like grotesque faces. Also, when I went through this phase where I was drawing people aging. Like, so I'd start out with a young man or a woman and just age them through the years till they're an old person. I got notebooks filled with that, of people aging, like just the face.
Huh.
So a lot of that, but I'm sure you're the same, but like, well, I went to school, but I was just not interested in doing schoolwork or homework. I just drew all the time. Drew in my notebooks and drew all over desks and stuff. I was just obsessive about it. It was not really anything else I was good at or meant to do. So, so I went through a phase after high school where I said, no, I don't want to be a cartoonist because it's too expected. My parents and my friends, everybody expects me to, parlay this into some kind of career. I'm not sure I'm ready to commit. So I took a few months off and went to Boston University and tried not to draw at all. But I wound up just like I was drawn back into it, and so I went back to New York after Boston, signed on to School of Visual Arts as a student, first a night student, and so the rest is history.
Was Klaus hanging around there at the time? He
wasn't. No, Dan then, no.
Okay.
Pete and Close were around. They were going, I think they were signed on at Pratt, but they would sit in at classes at School of Visual Arts. The guys who were in my classes were Mark Newgarden, Kaz was we didn't like each other at first, and then we became good. We're great friends to this day. But Kaz and I, it was like we were opposites. He was like a punk from Jersey City, snarling punk, and I was like this Upper West Side Jewish, rich kid, or at least the son of rich people. It's like, so we just we circled each other like we didn't like each other. But, then we discovered we both loved Robert Crumb's work and Underground Comics. And then we wound up in the first issue of Raw, so we felt connected that way. So, we remained friends.
Yeah, when I'm working on a book, I kind of become obsessed with it, where I have like tunnel vision almost for everything else in my life. It's all about just completing this thing that needs to be done.
Yeah, we're the same.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at, like cutting it off. Like I'll work on something and at 4 o'clock I stop and I just go about my business. It's like, I help make dinner. We have cocktails, or, I have one day a week where I go out and do supermarket shopping. So, I'm pretty good at that. I'm not upset. I'm obsessed when I'm working on the stuff.
Yeah.
And I think about it all the time too. Like, okay, what's the next piece going to be? I actually have it in my head what I want to draw, even though, then I need good photo reference of the person, just specific images and stuff that I'm going to include possibly in the background. But I have it, I'll sketch it out first, really rough sketch, and then put it together like it's a puzzle, So.
And then at what point do you approach Eric and Gary at Fantagraphics and tell them, like, this is what I'm doing now?
I've had a good relationship. I mostly work with Eric these days, Eric Reynolds. And when I mentioned, I said, I'm thinking about doing a book of 100 portraits of underground cartoonists. He said, look, if you want to put the time into it, great, we'll publish it. So that's as simple as that,
Yeah.
No back and forth, really. It's been like that for 30 years now.
Yeah. No, that's what it's so good about them, is that they'll basically, you can say, like, even I want it to be hardcover. I'd like it to be, I get the same papers that you used on this book, or like, you can request.
Yeah. He says, like, just pull, go through your Fantagraphics book, and it's like what paper stock, or what cover stock, and it's like, the drill. But
yeah,
first, there was a period where I wasn't really doing books. I was mostly doing magazine work. But then Monty Beauchamp asked me to do one of these blab books, these square blab books, like 30 pages. And I'm thinking like, well, what should I do? I said, well, like I like drawing old people and I like drawing Jewish comedians. So let me combine that. So when I did the old Jewish comedian books, they were the first books I did for Fantagraphics for about, maybe 15 years, and the first one really did well. So that led to the second two. And then since then, every couple of years I have a new book for them. The next book I'm doing for them is going to be a collection of new portraits and stuff that I've done working, I actually a little bit working on the underground portraits book. I did some of the stuff, and then more recent things and some of the stuff that's come out as prints. So that'll be my next book with Gilbert Gottfried on the cover.
Oh,
so
great.
Kind of a tribute to him.
What was Spiegelman's status? Well, like when he was a teacher at the school, like he hadn't done Mouse yet. What did you guys, do you style? Oh, he's like an underground comics guy. Like
underground comics guy. Plus he was the co-editor of Arcade. So I knew that. And yeah, that's basically it. It's like he was teaching language of the comics, which was it was more of a lecture class, although he'd give out assignments and whatnot. And so it was the same lecture he was doing at the time. For I don't know where he was doing those lectures back in New York, like in the West Village and stuff. He'd do these evenings where he'd present this slideshow, talk about comics.
Yeah.
I guess one of the first guys to actually, take comics seriously, talk about the past and the present, or, what he liked in the present, which was mostly Robert Crumb's work and his work.
Yeah.
And a few other people. But so that's the class he taught.
You must have met, because, I was talking to Gary Groth about this at SPX. It's like, I got into comics at the time when a lot of these underground guys were still alive. Like I met Spain, like I feel like lucky enough to have met like a lot of them, but you've met probably most of the people that you've drawn, right?
S. Clay Wilson I met once, but we corresponded as well. All these guys were really generous. I mean, really like complimentary, especially Crumb at the beginning when I was sending him stuff for Weirdo. But beyond that, they were just like, so they took the time, and I was nobody, but they took the time to like get back to write me. Some of them were long letters, or when I'd meet them, they couldn't have been more gracious, and across the board. I didn't run into anybody who was snotty. But they were all terrific. Robert Williams, like all those guys. Unlike some of the older timers, who I'd run into at comic conventions in the 70s, like a Bob Kane, for instance. I have no terrible. There's nothing terrible that happened, but it was just his persona. He would show up like he was Jesus Christ, he would extend his hand if somebody approached him, like he was a god,
And then it was hilarious, by the way. Had you seen that?
Pre-prepared sketches of Batman, those like loose Batman heads that he would pretend he drew himself.
Yeah.
And like take a magic marker and go over the pencil that some other artist had prepared for him. It's so great.
I would love to do a graphic novel on Bob Kane.
Oh, that would be great. Well,
I would get. I mean, how could you pull it off? It's like
seriously. Well, you'd have to a big part of it would have to be about Bill Finger, who actually did the work and created all that stuff.
But you can't, because I approached
as well.
This was something that me and Mark Newgarden were talking about doing together. Like we were gonna do this Bob Kane graphic novel, and we went to Charlie at Abrams about it. And Charlie's like, it would, Abrams has a relationship with Warner Brothers. They don't want these guys coming in there and doing a book that like degrades their property.
It's complicated, but
yeah,
Bob Kane has really been outed over the last few years. It's like everybody's on to him, even as I guess he has defenders. I kind of admire him for his chutzpah. He's just able to get away with that for so long and coast on it, and just be the celebrity, the Batman guy. Really hardly had anything to do with it. I think people who analyze the first issue that he drew, they have analyzed every single panel, like where he got those panels, like a reference for taken from other comics or pulps or whatnot. Every pose, every single every iota.
All right, man. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time. I really appreciate that you gave me this opportunity.
Oh, it was fun, Noah. It was great. We haven't met either, so this is our. Yeah. Well, we met once briefly.
Yeah, briefly. So
this is snotty to you. I forget.
No, you were nice. I met you and your wife Kathy were at SPX. Okay. So it was just a big Fantagraphics thing. So.
Right. Well, hopefully I'll see you soon at one of them.